Welcome to 10th or Tuesday. This is episode number 33. My name is Michael Boldin, here with
Michael Maharrey.
Mike. Today is day 460 that the GOP has failed to get rid of Obamacare. It's something we're going to be keeping track of for a long time, I'm assuming. But in our last episode a couple of weeks ago, we focused primarily on civil asset forfeiture. We just kind of covered things that were going on the state level, some good bills that were moving forward and passing to restrict or end the practice, and then deal with some of them, deal with a federal asset forfeiture reform. And then you had this really interesting report that was picked up by FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, which I saw that they reposted this morning on their Facebook page. They must be getting some attention, or they really like it. It's great art. It's a great column about how police lobbyist groups in Minnesota were working actively to oppose your efforts. And this is, I mean, I guess the way you described it, this is basically what we see, Mike, in any state that we do this on. We try to restrict asset forfeiture. We get the same arguments, right?
Yeah. It's almost like a template. They whip out the template and insert different names.
Yeah. Now you had, and I don't think you were surprised about this, but you put up a blog this last Friday, I think, talking about how you experienced almost the same thing in person on a different issue. So let's get everybody up to speed on what's going on.
Yeah. So on Friday, I went to court, and for those who don't know, I was sued by the city of Lexington, Kentucky over an open records request that I made last summer relating to surveillance technology. Basically, the Lexington Police Department has some super secret surveillance cameras. They call them mobile surveillance cameras. And they don't think we need to know anything about those. And so when I did the open records request, I initially appealed to the Attorney General's office, which is the process here in Kentucky. And the Attorney General basically said that the city's arguments were a bunch of BS and told them to hand over the documents. So instead of handing over the documents, they sued me. And so we had our hearing on Friday, and it was really interesting. And, I mentioned template. It really is like there's this central place where some guy's writing a script for the police department, and they go, oh, yeah, we're going to go to court. We're going to go testify. We need the script. And, they whip it out because it's the same arguments on all of these issues: surveillance, asset forfeiture, police militarization. And it always comes down to two things. If whatever it is that you're trying to stop, if it happens, the police swear that, number one, criminals are going to run rampant in the streets, and number two, officers are going to die. And it sounds like that's hyperbole, and it's really not. I mean, that's almost verbatim what they're saying. We're going to have officers getting shot if you allow this the public to know what kind of cameras we're using.
Officers are going to get shot if people are allowed to have guns, or if they grow industrial hemp, they will hide it in marijuana fields, which you and I have learned over the years actually is the most idiotic argument, because if you try to hide hemp, like this happens in every state that there's an industrial hemp bill. Police lobby groups come out and tell state legislators in committee that if they try to legalize hemp, then human beings, individuals like you and I, we are likely to be a danger because someone is going to grow hemp and hide marijuana in a hemp field. Well, the science behind that actually says if you do that, the hemp destroys the THC in the marijuana. So anyone who's trying to grow pot is never going to put it in a hemp field. So they obfuscate, they lie, they make stuff up, they try to use fear, and you experience this. So you're a danger in the city of Lexington, Kentucky.
Absolutely, and an undue burden. And I'm sorry that as a taxpayer.
Is that the phrase that they used?
Oh yeah, that's actually the legal phrase that they're using to try to hide the documents, that telling us what kind of cameras they have would be an undue burden on the police department. Because their argument is if we know what they are, and this is kind of funny too, these are covert surveillance cameras. So they claim that if we know what kind of cameras they are, the criminals will be able to avoid them. Well, if that's true, they're not doing covert right. Covert is supposed to be hidden. And I just, you just can't wrap your head around these arguments, but, they throw them out there. And the sad thing is police lobbies are so strong, and they have so much sway over policymakers and maybe judges. I don't know yet because they haven't ruled in my case. But, there's so much power in these police lobbies. People buy this crap. And I'm sitting here almost trying not to laugh because the judges frown when you laugh in the courtroom. But it's absurd, but somehow it sells, and I just don't get that. It's really actually quite frustrating, to be honest.
Well, I think the sad truth is that this is a market response, and as long as the market, the general public, wants to believe that government security agencies, aka police, FBI, CIA, we see some cracks in that armor lately, military, whatever it may be, as long as the general public in large numbers tends to revere these institutions as nearly infallible. That's the way they treat them.
Right.
Well, if the police say this, it must be correct. Don't question the cops. Don't question the Pentagon. Don't question the FBI. Don't question ICE. None of these people. If they're telling us something, they're only doing it for your protection. They never want to get more money or more power like every other government institution in history. So as long as the general public continues to do this, or believe in these types of things, it's a very, very easy sell for lobbyist organizations, and generally these are like police sheriff's organizations or police chiefs of various counties. It's very easy to push legislators who are weak-spined and lacking principles, which is the norm, into doing whatever they want, and that's what we see on issues across the political spectrum. Last week, asset forfeiture. This week, surveillance. Next week, hemp. The week after, it's going to be gun rights. Each and every single one, the number one opposition is police lobbyist groups. It's not Democrats being the number. I mean, we know that the left opposes the right to keep and bear arms. That's a pretty standard thing. Although I heard a very interesting interview up on the Scott Horton show. I've been listening to his podcast more often lately, and he had Cindy Sheehan on, who is clearly, Cindy Sheehan, if you remember her, she was the woman who, she lost her son in the Iraq War, and she was basically camped out at the Bush compound down in Texas, protesting, very far leftist. She may be just a pure socialist. I don't know what her actual political views are, but she told Scott specifically, as long as government is so armed up, I don't support gun control of the public at large. Yeah. So I think it's also a myth that it's just a left-right thing, but certainly as a general rule, the left or the mainstream left opposes the right to keep and bear arms, but the ones who are lobbying against gun rights movements in the state houses tends to be police lobbyists.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's almost like a template. It's as predictable as rain in Kentucky, that whenever anything that comes down the pike that is going to even, and it's not even, these are things that, you and I would look at them and say, this is a common sense idea. And the police will say, no, police officers are going to die and criminals are going to run rampant. And it's just this really weird disconnect from reality.
So let's back up, though. So what is the common sense idea that you are working on in Lexington, in your area, as a resident of the city, and what got you sued then? Just kind of give us a quick overview of that one more time.
Sure. So the ordinance that we're pushing, and I created a little organization called We See You Watching Lexington.
Yeah, link that, right?
I will link that. And
okay.
I've got a cohort, Clay Davis, who's been working really hard with me. And all we're trying to do is to get an ordinance introduced and passed in the city council that would require the police department or any other local government agency to get a city council approval for a surveillance plan before they purchase or use any surveillance equipment. So they would have to basically say, this is what we're buying. This is how we're going to use it. This is how we're going to handle the data. And this is how we're going to make sure that it's not being disproportionately used in minority communities or, to target political dissidents and things like that. So
now, just to be the devil's advocate, and I know the answer to this, but for the audience, when you say this is how we're going to use it, what do you mean by that? Are you telling everybody like, oh, let's telegraph to the criminals how we're going to spy on them specifically, or narrow that down? What do you mean by that?
So by that, we're just saying that, we're going to use this for drug interdiction, or we're going to use it to have parameters around it so that they can't use it for anything that they want. There has to be some parameters around the use of this stuff. We're not talking about technical schematics. We're going to
this camera's going to be here, and we're going to watch this particular person,
right,
and we're going to collect their. It's okay, and.
Right. Let's take it for instance. Let's say a government agency is trying to get. Let's go with an extreme piece of surveillance equipment. Let's say stingrays.
Okay.
They would have to.
And these are, as a reminder for everyone watching, stingrays are these devices that trick your phone into connecting to the stingray. It's this little box, a mobile box, instead of a cell phone tower. Every cell phone in range. So if they're trying to catch one bad guy, what they do is they basically collect everyone's location information and data within range of a particular cell phone tower. They connect all the phones in that area to the stingray and then pass it along to the cell tower. So you may be making an innocuous phone call, but all your information is being recorded.
Right, exactly. So let's say that the Lexington Police Department was going to get one of these things, and certain it's only a matter of time before they try, if they're not already using them now.
Right.
They say they're not, but I have reason to believe that might not be true. But that's a whole another side story. But let's say that they are. They would have to go to the council and say, okay, we want to purchase this. This is how much it's going to cost, and we're going to use them in these circumstances. Okay, we're going to use them for this type of crime, and these are the parameters that are going to be. And it better be a warrant. And then they would have to submit this to the council, and the council would have to give it a up or down vote after a public meeting. So that would allow the community to say, hey, we see the benefits, we see the potential abuses of this technology. Do we or do we not want it? So it allows the community to have input into the process. And all it really does is it creates oversight and it creates transparency. It doesn't say that the police department can't use this stuff. Quite honestly, I would oppose the city of Lexington.
It just makes it a local decision. So
exactly.
my personal issue right now, my big issue, is that these decisions right now are a national issue. They are a federal issue. They are directed by the Department of Justice. Mm-hmm. They are driven by federal funding programs. Yep. There is it's a direct link. It's basically like if you've ever driven on the freeways in Chicago, they have the express lanes with no exits and no entrance. And in those lanes, you go from point A to point B before you can have an exit. That's like from Washington, D.C., or Langley, for example, right to Lexington with no in-between. No one who lives in the area, not even in the state capital, has any say over this because the federal government either provides funding or direction or specific gear directly to the local police department and says, you use this, and then here's some rules and parameters about what we want you to do if you're using this equipment. And this basically just interposes the local governing body, the people, their representatives locally, into the process. It gives them a chance. I mean, maybe a lot of people, like I said, the market these days tends to be on the side of law enforcement, whether local or federal or whatever it may be. So maybe the people will say, okay, we're totally fine with the police spying without a warrant, but at least there's a different decision being made than from Washington, D.C., and because I think the far-off decision is really the most dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just common sense. We should know. I should not be getting sued because I'm asking what type of cameras the city of Lexington is using to spy on people. I mean, I don't see how anybody, and most people that I talk to are like, oh, that's horrible. But then there seems to be this disconnect between, oh, this is horrible, and we need to take action to stop it. And, that's a frustration with any type of activism, I think, is getting people motivated to actually care enough to call a council member or to raise a stink about it. But, we're raising a stink. And so, at least people in Lexington now, at least they know that there are cameras being used and that they're being hidden. No matter how this lawsuit comes out, it's obvious that the police are trying to hide something. And I think most rational people realize that it's ludicrous that, I'm getting sued because I asked the wrong question.
Yeah. And you've put together a really great series of podcasts, Activism 101. Mike, hopefully you'll link to that. There's a lot of holes that we can fill in here, but I don't want to put the whole episode on all the background here. For those of you watching who aren't aware of what's going on, Mike, how many episodes of that podcast have you done? 15?
I don't remember, but I haven't done any for a while.
I know, but is it like 10 or is it 30?
No, I think we're in the 20s.
Okay, so there's a lot of podcasts. They're generally 3 to 5, 6 minutes. Each step of the way that Mike has gone through this process, it's really, really interesting to see how this plays out, and maybe you can replicate this in your own community, hopefully without getting sued. But, of course, we know that they sue people like yourself as a chilling effect. They want people to be afraid, but luckily you have some friends at the ACLU who are representing you at no cost or donating. Are they donating the time?
Yeah.
How does that work?
This is effectively their case.
Okay.
So they took me on as a client. They're handling all of the legal aspect of it, and they're not charging any fees. I think they are going to go after the city if we win. to
recover damages.
But,
well, that's good. Okay, So the police are basically saying if you even know what type of gear they're using, that they've probably gotten through federal grants without any.
I know for a fact they've gotten grants for it because I've seen some of that paperwork.
So in essence, this is a federal spying program being run by the Lexington Police Department, and they are fighting it tooth and nail. They want to keep it going. We know that they're warning that it's going to be dangerous to make local decisions instead of federal ones. And it's the same thing that we talked about last week on asset forfeiture and what we've been covering on all these other issues. And the idea of having a local community actually just making the decision on how they want to deal with privacy, I think is really important. We've seen a couple of local communities move forward with this type of legislation. For example, Berkeley, California. You've been following this for quite a while. They just passed one of these ordinances that you're working on in Lexington. Very similar, right? Very
similar. Yeah, it's based on the same model. And this is actually a model that we helped contribute to with the ACLU. We actually had some input in this national kind of template that's been done. It's the Take Control Initiative is what it's been dubbed. And I think it's been introduced in I think we're close to 20 cities at least that have introduced this across the country. A number have already passed it. You mentioned Berkeley. That ordinance is slated to go into effect, I believe, on April 29th. So coming up here soon. Davis.
And what is the Berkeley what's the Berkeley ordinance? What is it doing? Just give me an overview of what's going on. What did they pass?
Almost exactly what I described in terms of what we're trying to do here in Lexington. It requires local government approval of a surveillance plan before the law enforcement or any government agency in the city can obtain surveillance gear. And it also is retroactive. So any existing surveillance gear, they have to create a plan for that, get approval. And if they don't get approval, they have to stop using it.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, just make the decision local. I mean, that doesn't mean that the people locally are going to make what I consider the right decision for my life, but it's not up to me to dictate to people in Berkeley or in Lexington how they should run their own lives. I want to spend time, and I know you do, educating people on how too much power in government hands, whether at the federal, state, or local level, is extremely dangerous. So the closer that we are to the individual with these decisions, I think the quicker that people can learn who is the problem or who isn't, or who's doing the right thing and who's doing the wrong thing.
Right, and I think if you're activist, if you have inclinations in that direction, and you do care about limiting surveillance, you have a whole lot better chance of having an impact in your local community and putting up some barriers there than you do getting the flow of money stopped from Washington, D.C.
Can I reiterate that?
Please do.
Okay, so if you believe in privacy and you're opposed to mass surveillance, you have zero impact. If you are focusing your energy on anything in Washington, D.C., nothing is going to change. Period. It will not. We've been warning this for quite a while, and I think the way that the things have been playing out is absolutely true. And we've got warnings from Senator Frank Church from back in the 70s, over 40 years ago now, who warned how dangerous things would be. And this is before the advent of the internet. And Congress has done nothing in that time. They've only made things worse and worse and worse. So focusing on D.C. is a waste of time. Focusing on your local community is very difficult, and you're not always likely to get positive things to happen, but you have a chance. Also, I think EFF.org has a very interesting project called the Surveillance Self-Defense Handbook. And I haven't really gone through this in detail, but I think we should maybe we'll start doing some interviews one of these days, but they're basically teaching people how to protect their own privacy as best as possible using tools on the internet, apps, and things like that. And that's another thing. You should take individual responsibility for your own protection as well. It's basically like the right to keep and bear arms. Like, if you're only going to rely on other people to protect your rights, to protect your home, your life, and your property, you're probably in danger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the obligation of government officials to protect you, there is none. I mean, even the courts have found that police are under no obligation to protect you. That's not their job, apparently. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're law enforcement.
Exactly, and not even law in the sense of what we would consider common law protecting persons' property and freedoms. We're talking about their statute enforcers.
Yeah, of course. So things have moved forward in Berkeley. Davis, you mentioned, I think another community in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
We've seen
Oakland is about to pass.
Yep. So California seems to be kind of leading the pack on this.
Absolutely.
And making the decision local is important, and a bill on the state level here in California, SB 1186, how does this impact? This is basically saying that local governments are supposed to have a say in this. Is it require them to make a choice on this?
Yeah, it would require any law enforcement agency in the state to get local government approval before they could purchase or utilize any surveillance equipment. So it puts the onus on the law enforcement. The local government agency has the option of approving or not approving, but it would require any law enforcement agency to go to their local government and say, hey, this is what we're wanting to get. This is how it's going to work. This is the impact. And then it would be an up or down vote by the council. Basically, it's a state version of the city ordinance. It would require that city ordinance in every city. What's
interesting, though, is California, and being a longtime resident here, I've lived here since the mid-'90s, California is known as a state that basically it's very centralized in its approach to government. And people who live here tend to be very centralized in their approach to government. But yet on this particular issue, they're saying the state isn't going to make the decision at all on this. They're just saying that what's happening now, this direct link between Washington, D.C. and local law enforcement has to be broken. And the only way to break that is by making every individual community responsible for their own actions.
Yeah, that's a really, really good way to put it. And, it makes sense because every community is different. Every community has different needs. Every community has different makeups, different attitudes. So why have a one-size-fits-all policy? I don't like one-size-fits-all policies from D.C. I don't think you really need one from Sacramento either.
Yeah, but I like a one-size-fits-all. I don't even like a one-size-fits-all policy if it forces people to be free. I think the idea of having that choice locally is really the way to go for people in the ANCAP camp. For example, Hans Hermann Hoppe, in a 1997 speech in Newport Beach here in Southern California, he basically talked about this is how you defeat the modern state, is you stop participating in these federal programs and you just bring all the decisions locally. Now, this is what he recommended as a strategy, and I think it's very similar to what James Madison recommended as a strategy. Bring the decisions closer to home. It's the same strategy that we recommend as well.
Yeah,
and that's really...
So, he said the same thing. He even mentioned the 10th Amendment, using the power of the 10th Amendment to decentralize decision-making away from Washington, D.C. and specifically away from the Supreme Court. In that particular quote. But yeah, the same fundamental idea that we see running through all of these various thinkers.
So while I would never recommend people in Kansas or Oklahoma or really anywhere else follow California on the right to keep and bear arms, because it's not a right here. I mean, it is a right, but it's a right that's always getting interference from state and local government.
Right.
But certainly on policies like surveillance, should SB 1186 pass, this is something that should be replicated in other states around the country. Unfortunately, though, what tends to happen in modern political climate is if California does something, the knee-jerk reaction from conservatives is that it must be bad. Even if it's good, I've heard this for years. Like,
I'm sure.
If California does something, even if it's the best thing possible, it must be something dangerous. We hear this a lot about Michigan. So Michigan, all the work that you did to get the Fourth Amendment Protection Act passed and signed into law in Michigan, this would ban the state from providing material support or resources to warrantless federal surveillance programs. That's basically all of them. We hear from a lot of people in the conservative community. Maybe that's the wrong term for it, but we hear from the right a lot of people saying, well, the only reason they're doing that is to protect Muslims.
Right.
And, I mean, if your knee-jerk reaction is you hate a particular state and you don't like anything about it, then stop paying attention to it. Just don't go there. Don't like them. But it's a very unfortunate. Is it wrong to call people retarded?
I don't know that if you're allowed to, but you already did.
I don't care. I don't care. This is mentally stunted. I can't think of something more stupid than to just say, oh, if these people do it, it must be bad, rather than actually looking at the merits of an action.
I'll tell you something funny. People give me crap because you live in California.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, that Michael Boldin, he's out there in California stand. I'm like, I didn't pick where he lived. Why are you bothering me about it for?
Yeah, humans are evil for where they reside. I don't know if that's. See, I mean,
I like your answer to that. You like your tyranny warm, and I'm inclined.
I do.
With that.
Well, I mean, it's the idea that somehow another state is more free. They're freer in different areas, or there's less government restriction in various areas in different states. So in California, there's less government restriction on weed, and in many already here in California on surveillance. Yep. Surveillance in California is probably not nearly as bad as in many red states, for example.
I think that's absolutely true. I tell you what, it's much easier. I watch a lot of the activists in California as they're fighting the surveillance at the local level and trying to, get ideas and whatnot for what we're doing here in Lexington. And they're having a lot more success in what they're trying to do than we are here. And it's just a completely different mindset. Here it's like, the police, they need to have the cameras in the parks because those kids are doing stuff and we're going to catch them,
How's the right to keep and bear arms in Kentucky?
Well, that's pretty solid.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's what I see as kind of a norm. So in places where the right to keep and bear arms tends to be strong, the right to personal choice of what you consume tends to be weak. So weed or raw milk, a lot of times they have a lot of government interference, or surveillance tends to be very pro-government and anti-freedom, and vice versa. So here in California, the right to keep and bear arms is extremely important, right? Some people say it's the most important one. I don't know. I think all rights are equally important personally, and an attack on any is an attack on all. But here, for some reason, they're much better on surveillance than they are on the right to keep and bear arms. Maybe one of these days we'll find a state or two that gets it all together. A lot of people will probably tell me that it's New Hampshire, but I don't think they are as well either.
Cold.
And it's cold. But, okay, so positive action here in California on local surveillance restrictions. Are you going to do another podcast on what's going on in court? Or? Okay.
I don't know. I am going to resume the podcast series at some point. We've kind of been in a little bit of a
nothing's been happening.
Pause. But nothing's been happening, and we've been struggling to figure out what the next step forward are because we don't have any support in the city council in terms of trying to get things done. So we've been doing some outreach to candidates and whatnot, and trying to figure out some steps forward. But as we get back rolling, and certainly once. I'm supposed to get a ruling here in the next whenever. Here's another funny little side note: the judge had not read the case.
Oh yeah, you really told me that.
Yeah, it was kind of odd. I don't want to say amusing, but I guess in a weird sixth sense, it was amusing. But yeah, he actually seemed to think that we were suing the city and not the city suing me. So. Hopefully he'll read that before he issues a ruling.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Also, another bill, a different issue on surveillance just passed out of committee in Massachusetts. That's House Bill 3439. This deals with automated license plate readers. Mike, do you have a good overview of that? What's going on there?
Yeah, I like this bill a lot. And Massachusetts is a really weird state in terms of how they do their process. So they had a number of ALPR bills that were in a joint committee. And so the joint committee's been passing those and sending them off to their various houses. So there's actually two ALPR bills that are pending in the House, both sponsored by the same guy, but they're different. And I like this one of the two the best. And it really focuses almost exclusively on how data has to be handled and not shared. Puts some heavy restrictions on the sharing of ALPR data. It requires destruction of data after 120 days without a preservation request or a warrant. And the most important aspect of this is by restricting the sharing of data and by restricting the retention of data, it helps keep this information from being fed into a DEA database, which is a national license plate tracking system that uses local and state information to, put information into this national database. So if we don't share the data, if we don't keep the data, then that can't end up in these federal databases. So it's a real solid data bill. And I like this one the best of the two that are pending there in Massachusetts, although the other one's not bad either.
Yeah, and the key on these license plate readers, sometimes they're in red light cameras, sometimes they're in fast track lanes, sometimes they're just everywhere. Sometimes they're on police cars, whatever it may be. The big issue. The problem is that they're collecting the information in the first place, because once they have that information, it becomes extremely dangerous for those watching the Facebook thing. That's what I think is the big issue with Facebook, is that they can't be trusted to not turn it over to be to people to use for nefarious reasons. And the most dangerous organization there, of course, is government, because government is the one that has the guns to force you to do or not do things, to scare you out of stuff, the taxing authority, all that stuff. So the ALPR issue is they're collecting all this information and it's just getting shared everywhere. They're building profiles of where people go. So this, again, how much does this restrict the sharing of data?
It's pretty much only allows the data to be shared in the course of an investigation. And I can't remember the exact wording and specifics, but I read it and was like, this is pretty solid. It's very restrictive. It would be among the best in terms of limiting data sharing.
With warrant requirements?
Either a warrant or a preservation order.
Okay, so that's pretty solid. So that passed out of committee in Massachusetts. I'm assuming it has to go to another committee before it can get forward.
It went from the joint committee, and now it's in a House committee.
Okay.
So that's kind of the movement there. And then it'll go from there to the full House and then over to the Senate side.
House Bill 3439. One other bill that I want to cover today before we head out is in Nebraska, the Right to Try Act, LB 117, was signed into law, I think, just last week. Mike, we just ran your report this morning on this.
Yeah, it was I want to say the 19th.
Last Thursday, you said. So Governor Pete Ricketts signed LB 117. These are the Right to Try Act. Basically, the FDA has complete control over who can try experimental medication, even if you're dying. We've got a number of other episodes where we've covered this. And the state level bills basically say in some narrow situations, we're going to allow people to make the choice on their own. I would like people to make their own choice of what they consume all the time, but this is better than the status quo. Yeah. And how many states have passed this into law? Do you know, Mike?
Nebraska was the 40th.
40 states.
Yeah, 40th. I saw that today too. You know, it's kind of been, I've been watching it, you know, it was 38 and 39. 40 sounds bigger.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. So you only have 10 states in the whole country that do not have this on the books now.
So it's bypassing an FDA restriction. It's basically saying, okay, FDA, you have this regulation. We're going to ignore it in some situations. I think that opens the door for people to ignore it in more situations, and we've covered that in the past on how some states that have passed it start to expand it, Utah, Louisiana, for example, to other areas or other issues. Right. That's very positive. I know in Washington, D.C., there's been a push to get a national Right to Try Act passed. I would like to just see the FDA get out of the issue. I know President Trump has supported the Right to Try Act, which I think is very positive. I'm no fan of the president, but that when he does something right, that's good. Do you have any indication, or have you followed that at all? I just know it exists, and it's kind of moved forward in D.C.
I was looking the other day. I think that it had initially it was put up for a vote in the House, and it did not pass.
Okay.
And then somehow they did a procedural thing, and like a week or two later, they got it passed. I'm not sure what and I've not read this bill. I don't know how comprehensive.
I don't look at them.
But and so now, from what I understand, it's over on the Senate side, and it's just kind of languishing around over there. So I'm kind of halfway watching it, because eventually I'm going to do a report about how they don't get it done.
Well, and even if they do, the message is the same. I think the message is the same. If they don't get it done, well, thankfully, there's 40 states that are doing it anyways. Right. And if they do get it done, we know that they didn't do it first. They were only doing it because it's such a popular thing that's passed in a bipartisan nature. Very few no votes, whether Democrat or Republican, in any state. It passes by huge margins everywhere. It was, well, this was a close one, actually. 35-13 is considered, in my mind, a close vote.
That's about as close as we've seen it.
It's rare. A lot of them are like 99-1. Most people vote yes on these, like saying, okay, someone's dying. They want to try something that's gone through some phases of testing. Let them do it. They've got 3-6 months to live. Why should we get in the way? And I think that should hopefully teach people to expand that mentality further. But the message is very important. The federal government didn't just, 5 years ago say, we should start having these right to try bills and let patients do this. No. Thankfully, the Goldwater Institute started pushing this legislation in Arizona, Colorado, Louisiana, maybe Missouri early on, and it just caught on. And once it catches on, then all of a sudden the feds are saying, well, now we're going to come to the rescue, but it's really after the fact to make themselves look good. And the same thing is going on with marijuana prohibition. All of a sudden, you got people like Chuck Schumer on board with legalizing or decriminalizing on a federal level. John Boehner is now a lobbyist for a marijuana company. These people are drug warriors. They've wanted federal control, start to finish, top to bottom, all the time. But they've lost. The states have won. They've just not put the final nail in the coffin eventually. And we even have this in a video. I think you wrote the script and I did the production and editing, where in essence the end result is eventually the feds are going to have to do this to save face instead of having to admit that state and local and individual resistance defeats them. But that's hopefully we'll get the message across to more and more people.
And this is the strategy. Everybody in the United States, and this is what we're taught. I mean, this is what I did for 40 years. It's a top-down approach. We're gonna elect the right president, and we're gonna get the right Supreme Court justices, and we're gonna get the right guys in Congress, and then everything's gonna be great. And it never works that way. But when we see these from the bottom up movements, from the local to the state, then it percolates up to the national level. You mentioned marijuana. I was thinking hemp. Just a few weeks ago, Mitch McConnell introduced a bill in the Senate to legalize industrial hemp for commercial production.
Yeah, now that there's thousands and thousands of acres growing for commercial production in defiance of federal law. Now that it's happening already, they're going to, possibly legalize on the federal level. Yeah.
Right. So, that's three issues. We're seeing this go on with the direct primary care. That's another bottom up type of movement. So to me, this is the strategy that we need to be taking, and just forget about these people in Washington, D.C. Take the 202 area code off your phone. Don't call those people. And
it's the only thing that works. It really is the only thing that works. I haven't really figured out. I know maybe we can discuss this sometime in the future. As we get through, a lot of the state legislative sessions are closing, other than places like California, Michigan that are year-round. I want to start covering, and we had talked a couple of weeks ago about you doing updated reports on how things are going issue by issue, but one that we haven't really talked about is foreign policy, the Defend the Guard Act, but that's only a very narrow part of it. Maybe sometime in the future we can kind of dig in further and look into this. I know you did a report a while back about North Carolina and the CIA rendition, their torture program, to illegally take people to other countries where they don't have restrictions on these actions. And
Right.
they partnered with the state of North Carolina to do this, but the state can actually opt out of that. So there's a lot of different ways that this can happen, a lot of phone calls, protests, marches on D.C., whatever it may be. They don't ever get results, but they do raise a lot of money, it seems like, for political organizations that end up going into the pockets of political candidates trying to win office in D.C.
Eventually, it's in the pocket of Boehner, who's the newly minted marijuana act.
Man, that guy is awful. Okay, I think we're good.
Yep.
I don't have anything else to cover. You do? Anything else we should know about?
I don't.
Other than that beautiful book over your left shoulder, Our Last Hope.
Like that, I finally got, this is a hard copy. This has been out for like 6 months now, but this is a revised edition. It has an additional chapter and got rid of a couple of typos. And
is that the one that I just sent you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you got them.
I got them.
Okay, great. You have an event. You're taking him to an event soon, right?
I do. I'm doing I'm speaking up in Northern Kentucky at I think it's a Tea Party thing. The Tea Party's still a thing, apparently. So I'm going to go up and talk about Madison's blueprint and basically talk about what we've just talked about, this whole bottom-up approach instead of focusing all your attention on D.C.
Yeah, and I'm emceeing an event here on May 5th with Scott Horton's going to be in town.
Nice.
From Scott Horton Show here in L.A. It's hosted by Liberty on the Rocks. There's also going to be the Lions of Liberty podcast, and I think Jason Stapleton will be there as well. They're probably recording something. I'm not sure really what I'm going to do other than mostly just hang out and talk to people. But if you're here in Southern California, look for Liberty on the Rocks, Los Angeles, Twitter, Facebook, Eventbrite, etc. It's a free event, 4 to 8 p.m. in a bar. It's a social event. It's fun. Last time when Dave Smith was around, maybe there was 100 some odd people. It was a really cool event. Just getting to know a lot of the local activists in the area. So those events, and we'll keep you updated with more things and more bill reports in our next episode here on 10th Tuesday. Of course, if you support the work that we do, go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/support. Memberships start at just $2 a month, and we can really use the help. Of course, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you here next time here on 10th Tuesday.